All righty, here we are. I'll just wait a second till I can see that folks are able to enter into the Zoom. Here we go. All set. Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Those of you audience members who are now joining us, thanks for sitting in the waiting room for a couple of extra minutes. Of course, we are trying to be all together in the space, or many of us at least, and that means a new world for all of us. Thank you for your patience. So good afternoon and welcome to part one of our 2 roundtable events with the newest cohort of Concordia University Research Chairs. We are thrilled to welcome you both into ForSpace proper and via Zoom for the very first event of our fall 2021 season, and incidentally, our first hybrid activity. So we thank you for your patience ahead of time as we oil our joints here once again, do a rust check and whatnot, and welcome in our esteemed panelists and our online audience. For those of you unfamiliar with us, located on unceded Indigenous lands in downtown Tiohtià:ke or Montreal, Concordia University's 4th Space operates as the front door to the university, collaborating with our community to make Concordia research initiatives and course activities publicly accessible through interactive events such as today's. I'll remind you to please go ahead and use the Q&A if you have questions to pose, or you can raise your virtual hand and we'll happily unmute you so that you can speak during the question period towards the end. That's housekeeping done for me. I'll just mention that we are recording and live streaming this event, and I'll pop those links in the chat in a minute. And on that note, it's my pleasure to pass the floor to Interim Vice President, Research and Graduate Studies, Paula Wood-Adams. Welcome, Paula. Hi.
Hi, thank you, Anna, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our roundtable with 5 new Concordia University Research Chairs. As Anna mentioned, this is the first of 2 roundtables. The second, with the remaining 6 chairs, will take place next week on September 21st at 2 p.m. The Concordia University Research Chair program plays a leading role in deepening our research capacity, as well as in strengthening our training of highly qualified personnel. These research chairs also lead the university's positioning in strategic research areas. We currently have a total of 60 Concordia University Research Chairs at the Tier 1, Tier 2, and New Scholar levels. The goal of this event is to provide an opportunity for our new chairs to meet each other and to create a sense of community. Through sharing their research program objectives, there is also the chance to create potential collaborations. We do want to engage and exchange with you, the audience, and let our community, both internal and external, learn more about what a university research chair is. So please feel free to post questions in the Q&A. I'm delighted that we're able to exchange with these leaders in their respective fields and learn more about what they do. Let's begin. First, we'll start with some brief introductions, starting with Krista Byers-Heinlein. Please tell us your chair title and a little bit more about your research program.
Thanks, Paula. My name is Krista Byers-Heinlein. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology, and my research chair title is Bilingualism and Open Science. So that reflects both the content of the research that I do, bilingualism, and how we do it, which is open science. So on the bilingualism part, we're really interested in, especially in very early bilingualism. So babies and very young children, how they take those first steps to learning their language if they're exposed from 2 languages simultaneously or in close succession. So what are they listening for? How do they sort the 2 languages out in their mind? How do they learn the sounds, the words, and the meaning of their languages when there's 2 languages there? Which of course is a topic that's really important both here in Montreal, where we know that more than a quarter of children under the age of 5 are growing up bilingual, as well as throughout Canada and the world where there's lots of bilingualism. And on the open science front, open science is sort of a newer movement in science and in knowledge that makes science more collaborative, more shared, more open, and more available to the entire world. And for those who are not scientists, you might think, well, isn't that how science always works? And the answer is no, that historically it's been difficult to access scientific information, scientific journal articles, even the scientific data that we have for different researchers to use. So my lab is using many different open science practices, like sharing our raw data online, like posting preprints of our journal articles early on in the publication process, and working collaboratively on a large scale with many other labs around the world to jointly collect data on very large projects. And so I'm excited to, as part of this research chair, to see what's up with other researchers at Concordia and Open Science so that we can exchange different practices and knowledge on this.
Thanks so much, Krista. Now I'll pass it over to Tan.
Thanks, Paula, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So my name is Thanh Dang-Vu. I'm a neurologist, I'm a professor in the Department of Health, Kinesiology, and Applied Physiology. So the title of my chair is Sleep, Neuroimaging, and Cognitive Health. And that's basically because what we do in our lab is to really try to understand how and why people sleep and look into the brain to understand those issues. So that's why we have neuroimaging as one of our tools. We're really interested in looking at brain activity, brain structure of people who sleep well, of people who sleep badly, to understand what's happening, what might cause sleep problems. And so one thing that is important is also we're interested in how sleep and sleep problems might relate to other health outcomes. We're interested particularly in brain health and cognitive health. Diseases just such as Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline with aging. That's something that really interests us. And there's an increasing evidence that sleep plays a role in how those problems happen. And in my lab, we're trying to better understand those links. And one thing that we're also interested in is to design, evaluate different interventions that might help people sleep better and see how those interventions would also maybe hopefully help people preserve their memory over time. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing in the lab. So we are a very dynamic lab with people across different disciplines, because that's how sleep research works. We have people from physiology, psychology, engineering, physics, and that's a really transdisciplinary domain, and that's what makes it very interesting and also very important and relevant for a lot of implications in daily life. So here it is.
Thank you so much, Tan. Now we'll move on to Alice, who's online.
Oh, apologies for this little video lag. Hi, thanks everyone for sharing your research. My name is Alice Jarry. I'm an artist researcher and assistant professor in design and computation arts. And my current title is Critical Practices in Materials and Materiality. I specialize in site-specific responsive works, art science practices, and social environmental design. And my research engages with cultural and material production, and I focus on the transformative potential of waste, residual matter, smart and biomaterials for the built environment and the arts. And this is important because globally, less than 9% of the resources we extract and produce find a second useful life. And this is still reflected in Quebec and Montreal. And I believe the current ecological crisis requires rethinking our modes of engagement with matter, but also demands the development of new plural methods that are inclusive of cultural, scientific, and community-based knowledge. So the CURC operates at the crossroads of arts and science to look at social, environmental, technological, and political issues related to material production. Research creation is the main approach, and it intersects with practices in materials engineering and environmental science to develop practical, aesthetic, and methodological knowledge about materialities and how they can be resilient for our environments and our communities. And the arts and design sector is becoming a leader of speculative investigations that impact material future. So along students and researcher collaborators, this CURC will look at both the effective and affective dimensions of materials and work towards mobilizing a new sensitive, critical, and lasting experience with technologies and environments. I work across 3 research units, such as the Milieu Bio Lab, the Topological Media Lab, and the Cities Institute. And the CURC is thus envisioned as a space for creation, innovation, and dialogue about the different ecological implications of our material world. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Now I'll hand it over to Anton.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anton Shevchenko. I'm an assistant professor at John Molson School of Business, and I do research on supply chain management. And my CURC looks at operations and sustainable development. And the idea is quite simple. What I want to do is to study exemplary organizations that do some exemplary stuff when it comes to sustainability and see how they can help with the goals of sustainable development. So for instance, I'm currently studying charities that are effective. So we know from randomized control trials that they actually do help with, say, global poverty or malnutrition. And I'm interested, what makes them so special? Why they are effective while many are not? Or I would like to study, there are apparently fish farms in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia that can produce very high quality fish, just taste like a wild fish, protect local environments, and so they will help with overfishing. I'm like, that's interesting. I want to study those fish farms. Or there are interesting developments in nuclear energy, where you have a new design of nuclear reactor. It's called small modular reactor that have potential to help, especially remote communities, to switch them to more sustainable energy sources. So again, my CURC wants to target the best, the exemplars in sustainability, to understand what's so special, why they're able to do what they're currently doing, why they're so successful.
Thanks, Anton. And finally, Imad.
So hi, everybody. I'm Imad Chihab. I'm an associate professor in the Computer Science and Software Engineering Department. And my research chair is about data analytics and software ecosystems. In brief, today, software systems are not built from scratch. There's always people that are reusing software, and this software exists in what we call a software ecosystem. So my Concordia University Research Chair tries to look at ways to measure the threat of these reused components, to try and help developers produce software that is of the highest quality when you're depending on somebody else's software, and also to try and help the developers and the maintainers of these ecosystems maintain healthy ecosystems. Because as you can probably imagine, if one bad malicious package ends up in there, it can be really bad news. Happy to have more discussions about the research chair later on. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Imad. So next, we're going to dive a little deeper into each of your areas of expertise by having each of you ask each other a question. And I'm going to start us off by asking Alice a question. Alice, can you tell us about a specific collaboration that you've had with a scientist or an engineer? And in particular, explain how you managed to communicate given the differences in terminology and language between disciplines.
Thank you, Paula, for the question. Yes, perhaps I can briefly discuss 2 current projects. The first one is called Sustainable Co-Creation of Responsive Graphene Oxide Structures. And it works at the intersection of design and materials engineering, and it's funded through an Audace grant and conducted with Dr. Marta Cerruti at McGill. And just like to contextualize what graphene oxide is, it's a layered carbon-based nanomaterial that's derived from the oxidation of graphite, which is just like a pencil, but which can also be synthesized from organic waste. And GEO finds a wide range of applications in electronics, and high-tech material composites, and it can self-assemble in different 2D and 3D structures such as membranes and scaffolds. And through this project, I think to answer your question about how we co-address a similar question, but from different perspective, we look at questions that are at the core of research, both in material science and design, such as up to which point can materials mimic nature and become alive, changing themselves based on external stimulations, such as pH or light, and what happens when materials and human interact, and can this interaction between materials and the environment help improve our own environment through responsive sensors, skins, filters, for instance. And these are all common ground questions. So the goal is to co-fabricate geo-based responsive membranes and 3D structures spanning from the nano to the macro scale. So it involves both scientific and artistic perspective to look at the microscopic things and also how they can scale up in the built environment and at a larger scale. So the goal is to apply them as part of technologies for the environment, health, and the arts. And for this, we involve design, arts, and engineering postdocs, PhDs, and masters to collaborate and work together both in the Milieu Institute Biolab at Concordia and at McGill's Biointerface Lab. And responsive geo is envisioned as a new generation of smart materials, of course, but these structures also aim to develop new methods for arts and science collaboration. For instance, how can artists and designer understand the technology behind graphene oxide, and how can scientists come in artistic laboratories and engage with the aesthetic potential of all these materials? And we also engage with non-academic public in a reflection on material future. So for this, we are co-developing a documentary film, an exhibition, and a workshop where both scientists, artists, and the public can mingle and experience the sustainable possibilities opened by nanomaterials. And to answer your question about different arts and science methodologies and how we can implement it from the ground up, similarly, the project Excitable MRE Materials is a pilot study funded by Concordia's Team Startup Program and co-directed with Dr. Ramin Sedagheri from Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering and Michael Montanero from the Dance Department. And we all started to discuss and start from the premise that research in smart new materials is often tied to certain industries and their specific needs. However, we started to discuss how interdisciplinary art science research requires to open up this agenda and explore new domains of inquiry, application, and methods. So just to in a nutshell, what MREs are, it's the acronym for magnetoreological elastomers, which are material, which properties such as stiffness and damping can be changed through external magnetic fields. And these features are currently utilized in areas ranging from dynamic vibration control and smart actuators and sensor materials. However, it's not been researched a lot by artists and designer toward applications such as interactive installation objects. So the goal is not to answer the needs of the arts or develop specific application for science. The goal is to develop new methods from the ground up. So for this, we designed the project as a set of micro residencies across the Topological Media Lab and the Smart Materials and Adaptive Structure Lab, where researchers, students, and postdocs can learn from each discipline and examine concerns related at once to the built environment and to the experiential dimension of our relationship to matter. So this is achieved through joint literature reviews where we look at MREs from different perspectives, co-experimentation of prototypes in both lab, and investigation on the sustainability of these polymers, and also public workshops. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Alice.
So I think that it's my turn to ask a question. My question will be for Imad. your research is really intriguing to me. It's about software ecosystems, and my sense is that artists and scientists don't understand ecosystem necessarily in the exact same way. And you work in an ecosystemic way as a way to collecting a number of software components, material to build a software system. Can you provide further detail about how this reflects in practice in the context of a specific project? And equally, something I'm really curious about, because I imagine that this notion of ecosystem also reflects in the business and tech collaboration that you develop. Can you give us an example of how these collaborations are implemented in your research?
Super. Thanks, Alice, for a very tough question, but an interesting question. I think that, just to give you an example, I think that one of the first things that we teach our students today in software engineering is how do you actually choose a software ecosystem? Because without choosing that first, it's very difficult to actually develop a software system. And it used to be, your first question used to be something like, what is the first programming language you'll use, or what functionality you want to develop? But that actually is impacted heavily by which ecosystem you use. And maybe I should define a little bit about what an ecosystem is. So basically, it's a collection of software components. You can think of them as apps in an app store. We're probably very familiar with that. And those are typically, they can do all sorts of functionalities, but they're typically done in one programming language. They follow a certain design, if you will, more or less. They're managed in a certain way. And so this restricts, or this becomes a very important decision in how you want to build your software system. And maybe to give you some concrete examples about how components would be reused, I mean, these can go all the way from, one-liner, literally one-liner, meaning one-line piece of code, dependencies or components that you will use, all the way to some of these are hundreds of thousands of lines of code. So they go, it's a wide spectrum. And perhaps one of the most famous examples why actually ecosystem research has become so prevalent and so important in our community is the left pad incident. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, probably not, but this was a case that was heavily public. It was all over the news because there was one developer who decided to remove an 11-line of code piece of software. And it turns out that this piece of software is used in almost all major applications that are out there, web applications that are out there, to test their applications. So when this person decided to remove those 11 lines of code, Facebook, Twitter, Airbnb, I mean, you name it, the whole slew of all these applications were about to go down. In fact, some of them started to crumble, but luckily there was actually a backup of this package that was used to save the world, literally. Facebook was also one of them. And so this brought on a major question of, are we actually wrong in depending on these ecosystems? I mean, do we really need an 11-line piece of code? Could we not have written that? And this is where the research becomes very interesting, because we start to look at the goods and the bads. Usually when you talk about software ecosystems, people think it's all good. I mean, there's software out there, you can reuse it. However, it does bring on, other complexities. Management of these software systems becomes extremely complex, and even the ecosystems themselves. So of course we're humans, and since that left pad incident, you can Google it if you want. What happened is all of the ecosystems decided to not allow developers to remove any code. And now what happens, we have exponential growth in these ecosystems. So it becomes very difficult to actually find anything in these ecosystems. It becomes extremely difficult to know when things are updated and if you should trust these updates. So this is what my research is about. And I would say that we're trying to manage this in different ways. So we use a lot of data analytics techniques. We use, of course, machine learning to try and determine what are good indicators of good components in these software ecosystems, to try and help developers make the right choices and make sure that our software applications do not go down. And of course, there's the other side of it, which is the security side of it. So I'm sure everybody is worried about, security, data breaches, privacy, all these things. And in fact, a recent study showed that there's a 60% chance that any application on GitHub, which is our biggest repository of software out there, there's a 60% chance that any application on GitHub would have at least one security warning in a year, right? That is, I mean, immense. I mean, that's huge because GitHub has millions of applications. So when you think about that number, it's extremely large, in my opinion. So we try to, we're trying to find ways to A, sift through the noise, and B, try to determine what are the important security vulnerabilities so that we don't have, the cases that make it all the way to the news. And I think that we as a community have done quite a good job, but there's still a lot to do there as well. And I think your other question was about, collaborations and if whether, these collaborators use this technology. I would say that today, Microsoft is one of our biggest contributor to open source software. I know it's very ironic. I would not have, I guess, bet on that 10 years ago. Facebook is, Google. So this is very much a real problem that we have. And so, yeah, our collaborators are interested. They are involved in these types of projects all the time. And maybe to transition, because I've already been talking about my research, so I would like to transition to Krista now. And one of the things, Krista, it's intriguing that you brought up about multilingualism. One of the things that we have to deal with when developing software is the multitude of programming languages that developers have to learn and use. And of course, it's not the same reality, between human languages and computer languages. But I'm curious, how do you actually study these languages? What, are there frameworks? Are there certain theories that exist there and to help in the study of multilingualism?
Yeah, what an interesting question to think a little bit about the parallels between programming languages and human languages. And as you mentioned, of course, there's a lot of differences between the two. But I think, thinking about some of the challenges that programmers might have in managing different languages and how we teach different programming languages, you could imagine adults and babies who are bilingual, might have some of those same challenges. So, as a programmer, you might have a certain language that you use a lot and you're really fast in programming it. Well, what happens when you need to program in that language that you haven't really revisited very recently? You dredge that up from the back of your brain. Well, of course, bilinguals have that same experience. Bilinguals tend to have a dominant language, which is the one that they use the most, that are the most fluent in. And most have other languages that are non-dominant, that are a little more challenging, but they can still they can still do it if they need to. You could also think about, maybe there's that first programming language that you learn. Did you learn that better? Is that one easier to program in? Does that one stick with you more than another one that you learned more recently? And we see the same parallel with languages that maybe we learned early in childhood, that even if we don't tend to use them as much, sometimes they nonetheless are very strong for us. So I think there's interesting parallels there. But when it comes to children and learning language, of course, we're interested in bilingual babies, and these are babies who are learning two languages simultaneously. So I don't know if it's something that happens in computer science and computer engineering, that you teach your undergraduates two languages at exactly the same time, or if you tend to teach them one after the other.
So in some cases we do teach them two languages, but usually we try to teach them one to get the fundamentals, to understand, what do we mean by certain concepts like object orientation or abstraction. And once they get a good hang of that, then we kind of start to introduce different programming languages. I don't know if that's the same.
Well, so that's exactly the sort of theoretical question people might have about language acquisition. So, some might think, it's better to get a really solid foundation in your first language before you start on a second language. But actually, that special part of human language acquisition is that there's actually a sensitive period for acquiring your language. So early in life, in infancy and those early preschool years is when your brain is most able to acquire those human languages. Might be different from programming languages. So we know that babies are not confused by acquiring two languages simultaneously. Sounds like undergraduates are also not confused if they have to learn two at the same time. They figure out the difference. Babies are the same. And just like with programming languages, it's never too late to learn a new language later on in life. Of course, the human capacity for language makes it a little bit more challenging in some ways. So you might have an accent in a language that you learn later, but same as you mentioned, those fundamentals that you learned in your first language or your first and second language, often you can transfer that knowledge to a new language. So for example, I'm fluent in French. Spanish has a lot of overlap in French. You know, there's a lot that I can take from my French knowledge when I try to learn and speak Spanish. So I think I'll wrap it up there for the moment, but I think it's a really interesting question, and I look forward to continuing to dialogue on that. Thank you. I'm going to ask Anton a question. So I was really intrigued to look at your profile. And I noticed that one of your most cited papers had a title that was quite provocative. So why research in sustainable supply chain management should have no future? So this was published back in 2014. So I'm wondering if you might sort of revisit this idea for us and tell us more about how your research chair ties into a truly sustainable future.
Yes, so well, probably one of the reasons for having a provocative title is that people read the paper, increase the odds. But the idea actually was quite straightforward, is that sustainability should not be an add-on to supply chain management activities if we take it seriously. It cannot be like an afterthought. Instead, it should be like an integral part of supply chain management, where all the decisions related to product development or sourcing consider sustainability as a key criterion. So for instance, when a company decides what supplier to use for raw materials, the environmental record or health and safety record of the supplier should be key criteria. So, and once you have sustainability everywhere being an integral part of supply chain management, it becomes sustainable by default. So you no longer have a sustainable in front of supply chain management because it is sustainable. However, it's a very ambitious goal and we are far from getting there. So if you look at the companies, on average, most are they're hesitating to adopt drastic sustainable initiative. And instead they opt out to do like incremental change here, recycling there, produce colorful report about it. But to be fair to those companies, implementing like radical sustainable changes is very risky. You can go bankrupt, scary. So this is why they're very often hesitating to do that. But what's interesting, even though on average things don't look very good, there are companies that are amazing at implementing sustainable initiatives that are very drastic and very novel. And that's where I want to study. I want to study those, not your average firm, but companies that are perhaps small, on a smaller scale, but they're very good in a certain domain in terms of sustainability. So looking at exemplars, hopefully will tell us how to do sustainability and how other companies that are hesitating can adopt those practices. So now I'm going to Tan, and also I want to ask you just a general question because I was fascinated with sleep research. I think like it's what quarter or third of our life. There's more research on, on the third of our life, and it's a bit of an. So I think it's more research on sleep. And the question is, what are the major topics? Is it about sleep and quality of life? Like good sleeping habits. So for instance, after turning, maybe after 30, I discovered that a 15 minutes afternoon nap just improves my life. So if you could talk about, major topics, what you want to learn about sleep, I would be very interested.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So sleep research is actually a young discipline. Sleep research has really started to expand in the 1970s, 80s. It's quite a young discipline. To answer your question, there are more than one topic, but I think one of the key topics that's still unresolved is why we sleep. We still actually don't have a clear answer on that. We have some clues. We know that sleep helps, for example, maintain good memory. So we know that during sleep, where our memories are strengthened. We know that sleep might help clearing the brain from some metabolic waste that can lead to certain memory disease with time. We know that sleep can also strengthen our immune defenses. So that's something that actually people might less know. So it's important to sleep, particularly when you're sick or when you actually just got vaccinated. We know that sleep boosts vaccine response. We know that sleep also helps balance hormonal changes in the body. So it's important to sleep to maintain, for example, a good regulation of appetite, of glucose metabolism, to avoid developing diabetes and these kind of problems. So there are a lot of clues about why sleep is so important, but the final answer of why sleep has developed as such a vital function is still being researched. And I think that among the key topics that has really fascinated a lot of researchers is this role between sleep and brain plasticity and memory. There's been a lot of different trends on that type of research. Back in the 90s, I think there was a lot of interest on what is called REM sleep, or paradoxical sleep, which is when we dream a lot. And so people thought that this was really a stage in which memory is strengthened because the brain is still very active. But then in the past 20 years, the focus has shifted to slow wave sleep, which is deep sleep, where actually our brain is producing a lot of those waves that you can record on the EEG. And that reflects these periods of vast synchronization of the neurons. And it's thought now that's because the brain is so synchronized that you're able to transfer information about what you just learned to other parts of your brain to strengthen those memories. So, but we're still figuring out what mechanisms exactly, what types of memories, how is it really sleep something we require, or maybe it's just one of those factors that help. So there's still a lot of things to figure out. And I think as you mentioned the nap thing, which is there's been also a lot of research about napping. Personally, I love napping. I think it's great. That's great. And I think with age, when you age more, then you feel the need to nap more. So we know that nap is actually it could be a very important boost for your productivity, because it helps rebalance your brain homeostasis, so your level of energy, and then also helps consolidate some memories. But we also know that prolonged naps, which tend to happen more often in older people, like above 65, 75, tend to be detrimental, tend to be bad. So because when you nap for a long time, then you decrease your need for sleep, your ability to fall asleep, and eventually tend to develop more sleep problems at night. And so an increased amount of naps and sleep in general can also lead to more sedentarity and more health problems. So basically what studies have shown is that too little sleep and too much sleep is increasing mortality and morbidity. So it's just about the right balance. Same for naps. I think a nap in the early afternoon of 15, 20 minutes, max 30 minutes is usually considered as beneficial. More than that, it could be a problem, especially if you have problems falling asleep again. So, I mean, you see, with sleep, there's so many topics you can broach. So I'm just going to stop here. But, I'm happy to pursue the discussion. So I don't think I have any question to ask to anyone, but I'm happy to ask a question, if I may.
Sure, please go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to maybe follow up on what Krista said about bilingualism, because that made me think of what we know about bilingualism and multilingualism in older people, where it's been shown that it's been part of what we call cognitive reserve, which means that older people who speak multiple languages have more of this brain reserve that makes them more resilient to developing problems with aging. And so I was wondering if in babies who are exposed to multiple languages, does it confer any advantages in terms of school performances and future, academic success? I'm sure you probably studied something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tan, and that's a really actually hot topic in my field across the lifespan. So we have this evidence of cognitive reserve in older adults, evidence for cognitive benefits. Really harder to pinpoint in young adulthood, probably because young adults are kind of at the peak of their performance, so can't really see many differences. But in my lab and other labs, we have done some research showing that bilingual babies do show some more cognitive flexibility than monolingual babies. So for example, in a study we did in my lab, we taught them, for example, that whenever they heard a little chime, they would see something on the left side of a screen. And so they would learn to anticipate this little reward. And then we played a trick on them. We switched it to the other side of the screen and saw how easily they were able to adapt and learn this new rule. And actually the bilingual babies were more able to adapt than the monolingual babies. And so this is something really interesting in the lab. Of course, there's a question, does that translate to real life? And that's something that we don't know as much. So, sort of my take home message is I don't think that, parents need to rush out and worry about bilingualism because their kids are going to fall behind in school if they don't speak two languages. But speaking two languages can have a lot of its own benefits in terms of communicating with others, being part of your community, being able to travel and career opportunities. So I think, bilingualism has benefits on many fronts. If we have time, I actually have a question about sleep for you. So I'll just turn the tables. Same thing, you're bringing me to the older end of the lifespan. So I'll bring sleep to the young end of the lifespan. I know some people in my field have been thinking about babies who nap all the time. They sleep all the time. And some studies showing that this nap might actually be important in babies learning and even in language learning. So, if you or your colleagues, or what do you think about infant sleep? And of course, that's an important topic that parents think about a lot as well.
Very good question. And infant sleep and baby sleep is actually a whole discipline by itself and a whole community by itself. So I'm not an expert in that field, but we know that sleep during early childhood is a very important window for brain development. Okay, we know that during sleep, and that's been shown in animal models, when you deprive young animals from certain amount of sleep, you have some problems in the development of certain functions or senses and so on. So the same is probably similar for children, where during sleep, during naps, there's a lot of brain plasticity processes that happen, and they will promote development of language, development of motor functions, and so on. So it is certainly some, and it's actually why if you look at sleep duration across the lifespan, there is obviously a lot of sleep in babies and children, and actually that tends to decrease and stabilize across when you become a teenager, because that's actually in parallel with the critical periods of brain development. So yes, certainly sleep is very important for many things, and including for child development.
Thanks so much. So we are able to take questions from the audience if you'd like to post them in the Q&A, and then, or I guess in the chat as well, then Anna will read them out. Do you have any at the moment?
None so far. We are so grateful for our audience members being here and listening in, and we do invite you not to be shy. This is your moment, but I know that Paula, you've come prepared with some questions, so go for it.
Perfect, thanks. So Imad, I'm going to ask you a question. So as one of our top researchers in the area of software engineering, can you tell us what is your vision for the future of that discipline, both in terms of research and teaching?
Yeah, thanks, Paula. So I think that software engineering, the softwareization of the world is really put software engineering somehow at the center, but also has put us behind the scenes, because when you think about any software system, you always think about the applications. You don't really think about how is this software being developed, or how was it developed. And I think one of the biggest, the vision for the future, I think one of the biggest disruptors for us in the field is AI and the application of AI today. I think it's becoming more and more prominent. If you think about any of the topics that we discussed today, I'll just take, for example, sleep, right? So you have the URA, I don't know if you know, but there's a ton of analytics today that exist to help sleep. There's a ton of analytics to help financial markets. It's all across. And I think that when you think about it, we need to prepare software developers, computer scientists to fill this gap. I was just in a conversation a while back with the head of quantum at IBM. And he said, one of our largest threats today to quantum is not the technology. We know it's going to come. We know in 10 years it will be there. Our biggest threat today is a skill shortage. And so I think that, the vision for the future, I would say, is trying to adapt to these disrupting technologies that are coming, whether we like it or not, and really preparing our future students for that, and providing enough skill in the market for that. And I think computer scientists are pretty good at doing that. I think we adapt quite well. However, keeping up, our curriculum, keeping up our research, and we're very lucky to be in a country that really values education, higher education, research. So this really helps. But I think just keeping up with the pace is one of the biggest challenges moving forward. I'll stop there. I can, of course, talk a lot more about this. This is a very deep question, Paula, but I'll stop there.
All right. Thanks, Imad. That was a great answer. Alice, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a question, and then we'll come back, Anna, for the Q&A. Alice, can you tell me, for your research, what kind of training is most important for your graduate students as they navigate the current research landscape?
What kind of training? Well, many. I think this needs to, well, there's a need to think in terms of interdisciplinarity, to be able to draw inspiration as designers and artists from multiple disciplines. And it's not about appropriation of either science or art or community-based practice, but rather it's a way of engaging in different forms of knowledge and see how practice settings can inform research and vice versa. So this kind of trying to be first, well, open-minded to other forms of knowledge that are not necessarily arts-based. I think this is extremely important, but also train to, how can I say that this is something that one of my grad students told me when we were working on a super difficult project last year, fail, but fail forward. So I think training your student to fail forward and to make mistake and to iterate and to try again, at least in the field of materials and material experimentation, this is key. Because a lot of discoveries happen by mistake. So I think this is one key aspect.
Thanks, Alice. I completely agree on that issue of failing. In my experience, most research is about experiments that didn't go the way you planned. And having resilience and being able to manage that is really important. Anna, I think there might be a question in the Q&A.
You're good. How are you doing this, Paula? Amazing. Yes, there is. Such a pro. I think this is probably directed towards Krista. It's a great question that I'm sure many parents ask themselves. It's about exposure to screen time for children and infants. And is screen time an effect in children's language development? That is, does it enhance or hinder the language development of a child or infant?
Yeah, this is a great question and one that lots of parents have. So what we know about screens for young children, say under 2, is that they just can't learn very much from screens. That's not the way they learn. So the way young children learn, and especially learn language, is with interacting with real people. So it's that contingent interaction, that back and forth. That's something that a screen doesn't provide. Interestingly, things like Zoom or Skype, that is interactive. So I'm talking about, passively watching television, actively engaging with a grandparent. Actually, children can learn language that way. So definitely for young children, screens are not bad in and of themselves, but they take away valuable time that children might have doing other activities that they might learn from. As kids get older, they can start to learn from screens, but again, language is not something they're going to pick up. So a child is not going to learn Spanish from watching Dora the Explorer. Really, the best way is to have high quality and also high quantity interactions in that target language. So unfortunately, an hour a week is not going to be enough. We don't know what the minimum is, but trying to maximize that exposure to a new language from real people is the best way to promote language learning.
Can I maybe just follow up on that question? Because screen time is also a very important topic now in sleep research, because screen is also, and because the light emitted that are emitted by the screens are important signals for the brain to actually promote wakefulness. So what happens is that with screen times, you tend to disrupt sleep, especially if that screen time is prolonged in the evening and at night. So as it pertains to kids, but also actually to everyone. And it's important to take that in mind. If you have sleep difficulties, you should avoid too much screen time at night, particularly if you're reading a lot on screens, if everyone is using tablets or smartphones. So this is producing a lot of light actually that can disrupt your sleep. So just take that, just remind of that. That's very important.
Yeah, I think I need to change my habits around that. All right. So the next question then will be for Anton. And I would like to know, what do you think is the value of public engagement like this activity that we're doing today with regard to research?
Research in general?
Yes, or your research. Yeah.
Well, I think it's, well, let me give you an example there. In thinking about the climate change. Everybody says climate change is important. Mm-hmm. But what we want to know is how to actually get there. So if you set a goal, so lowering the carbon emissions, but how do you actually do it? So the conversation, it's important for conversation. Once you acknowledge that, say, climate change is an important topic, it's not sufficient. Now we need to talk about solutions. So what are we actually going to do? How are we going to get there? So I think that's maybe it's important for the researchers to actually talk about solutions to the problems, like no screen, no phone on the bedstand. Okay, I'll remove it. I'll leave it on my desk tonight. But same thing like for sustainability. Okay, so how are we going to get to the certain goals? It's important, very important to move there, because otherwise those goals won't be achieved, and public will have to participate in all those activities, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I completely agree. You know, I think that these days, actually having scientists and researchers and scholars speaking to the public about their work is more important than ever, because, you know, we find ourselves in a time where there's this kind of science denialism, especially about climate change and other things as well. And I really think it's important, the work that all of you are doing, and the fact that you're taking part in this event and trying to communicate with the public about your work, I think is really, really important and really fantastic. Okay. Sure, please.
Yeah, so maybe I have just a question for Anton as well. You know, whenever you talk about sustainability, one of the things I think that comes up a lot is you know, financial gain out of this, right? I mean, especially when you think in the corporate world. I think one of the key factors to adopting change is the financial gain. So I'm just curious, maybe not just about financial gain, but what are some of the key, you know, the KPIs or the indicators, right, that identify successful examples where either organizations or companies or even just the community has adopted and maybe succeeded at adopting sustainable change?
So I think about it a bit differently. So I think the sustainability will be driven a lot by entrepreneurs who just have an idea, and they just happen to believe in all like environmental goals. So they have an idea of doing something. You know, the most used example is Tesla, like, you know, having electric cars, and they figure out the financial model often comes later. So they have an idea, they're trying to develop it, and only later they will figure out whether they are able to survive financially or not. And most of them don't. Like if it's a radical, sustainable idea, it's very hard to implement. Most of them fail, but some are successful. And once they're successful, they will transform the industries. Now, think about, like, going back to Tesla. Now, Volkswagen has a car comparable to Tesla Model 3. Kia now has a car with a long range. So by showing that it's possible, Tesla was able, I think, in the is responsible for transition in the car industry. And maybe Tesla at some point will go bankrupt, but car industry will never be the same.
Yeah, so sorry, maybe I'll also to follow up. So I have a Tesla. It's a great car, by the way. But what I will say is, I think if you think about Tesla, I don't think it was just financial, right? So Tesla also gave a very performant car. Tesla gave advances in technology. You can, whatever, get your car to self-drive, although that's, I know it's not there yet. So these are the other types of indicators that I think they achieved. And that's what I was meaning. I mean, are there key types of other factors other than financial that really drive this change?
So for the final consumer, you have to make the transition easy. So this is why I'm thinking about fish farms. If you want fish farms to ultimately substitute with wild fish consumption, the farmed fish has to be of similar quality. Otherwise, people won't switch. Same with Tesla. It has to be exciting. Otherwise, because you pay a bit more, but since it's exciting, you are ready to switch. So you have to make this transition for final consumers relatively easy. Otherwise, it will be very hard to do that.
Thanks, Anton. And if I could just jump in, I think I saw Alice's hand up earlier. Alice, not to put you on the spot, but if you still have a final question, we do have a couple of minutes left.
Yes, I have a question for Tien and about sleep, in fact. A few years ago, I've read that book that says it all. By Jonathan Crary, called 24/7 Late Capitalism and the End of Sleep. And well, basically, it speaks about different professions where schedules are like too demanding, parents that are overworked, and so on. And I'm just wondering, in your discipline and in your field, how do scientists collaborate with different policymakers to favor sleep? Because it's a scientific problem, but it's also a social one. So I'm just wondering if this kind of collaboration happens at certain level.
That's a great question. The effects of sleep on the work performance and school performance is well established, and it's true that there's been some awareness about this. We know that some people, some maybe high profile professionals, claim that with only 4 hours of sleep they can function and perform very well. And so one thing that's important to know is that the lack of sleep doesn't only translate in poor cognitive performance, but there's also some effects that might not be visible, and it's like untreated high blood pressure. You do not see the effects right away, or untreated diabetes. You don't see the effects right away, but poor sleep, it can lead to increased risk of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and that's not something that's going to show up like after a couple of days, but over time that's going to increase the risk. So that's something that is important to promote and to increase awareness about, and the sleep research community is trying to make that effort. And so, but you're right that there's still a gap in terms of really reaching out to policymakers. Unfortunately, in Quebec and other places in Canada, a lot of the treatments that are the best recommended treatments for sleep problems are not covered by public health insurances, which is a really strong issue. And that comes to really the realization that our policymakers are not, probably not sensitive enough or not well informed enough about the consequences on bad sleep, not only on just daytime performance, but also on long-term consequences and costs associated with poor sleep. There's been a study in Quebec, a famous study done a couple of years ago, that's tried to estimate the cost of insomnia, which is lack of difficulties initiating or maintaining sleep, and it's been estimated that it costs approximately $6 billion per year for the province of Quebec due to loss of productivity and absenteeism and medical resources. So that's a huge amount. That's something that should make policymakers more aware about what cost might be saved from taking the problem more seriously. And then, but the sleep research community is really trying to promote that. I'm actually also a vice president of research of the Canadian Sleep Society. So we're working on different public campaigns to promote this awareness to the stakeholders, not only the public, but also policymakers and institutions. But yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Tan. Well, we've pretty much used up our time that we have for this event. And I just want to say how much I've enjoyed hearing from all of you. It's so fascinating, the different research, but in fact, how it all ends up impacting our everyday life. And yeah, I'm really happy to have been here. I'd also like to thank the team at Fourth Space for putting together this event and managing all the technology. And of course, the audience for taking part and attending. Thank you very much. Back to you, Anna.
Amazing. Thank you, Paula. Thank you all. It's been so great to have you in the space. We welcome you back at any time. Of course, we hope you are able to stick around for a few minutes and actually engage with one another in a relaxed way. And for our audience members, thank you for your patience as well and joining us for our very first hybrid event. We are hoping to see you back here more and more often. Please go to our website, what is our website? I've been offline for so long, I forgot. But concordia.ca/4 to check out upcoming events. Okay, on that note, we're going to close the webinar. Thanks everybody for being here. And thanks, Alice, for joining us from France. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Bye.